At 7:23 p.m. on the 3rd of April 2008, the National Weather Service in Little Rock issued a severe thunderstorm warning for parts of central Arkansas. A line of storms was moving east, and one supercell in particular had already shown rotation on radar. Meteorologists watched it closely. At 7:29 p.m., the warning was upgraded. A tornado warning was issued for White County, including the town of Beebe. The message went out over NOAA weather radios, local television stations broke into programming, and outdoor warning sirens began to sound. Everything seemed to be in place. Only a few minutes later, something was off. At 7:35 p.m., the tornado touched down southwest of Beebe. It was a wedge-shaped storm, wide and low to the ground. The rotation had been persistent on radar for several minutes, but the exact point of touchdown was difficult to pinpoint because of the rural terrain. The tornado moved northeast at about 45 miles per hour. It crossed Highway 67, then Interstate 57, and entered the northwest side of Beebe. The sirens were still wailing. The warning had been issued 6 minutes earlier. That is the kind of lead time that gives people a chance to take cover, but not everyone heard and not everyone who heard believed. At 7:37 p.m., the tornado struck the first residential streets on the edge of town. Homes were unroofed, trees were snapped. A mobile home park was in the path. The tornado was rated EF3 with winds estimated at 140 miles per hour. That is not the worst possible classification, but it is enough to destroy well-built homes, throw cars, and drive debris through walls. In the mobile home park, structures that were not anchored to the ground were rolled, crushed, or swept away. Residents who had not reached a shelter were exposed to the full force of the storm. At 7:39 p.m., the tornado reached the center of Beebe. It hit a nursing home. The building was a single-story brick structure built in the 1970s. The roof was peeled off in sections. Exterior walls collapsed inward. Patients were trapped under debris. Staff had tried to move residents into interior hallways and bathrooms, but the speed of the storm gave them less than 2 minutes to act. The building had no underground shelter. The safest place relative to the tornado was the central corridor, and that corridor was now open to the sky. At 7:41 p.m., the tornado crossed Main Street. A hardware store, a grocery, and a dozen small businesses were damaged or destroyed. Cars in the parking lot were stacked on top of each other. A church lost its steeple. The high school, which had been evacuated earlier in the afternoon as a precaution, had its gymnasium roof torn off. The school had no students inside, but the building was left structurally compromised. At 7:43 p.m., the tornado exited the town. It continued northeast for another 3 miles before lifting. The total path length was 11 miles. The average width was 400 yards. In less than 10 minutes, a town of about 4,000 people had been reshaped by wind. When the storm passed, the silence was immediate. Emergency crews began their response while the rain was still falling. The local fire department, police, and volunteers started digging through collapsed homes and the nursing home within minutes. State resources were mobilized. The Arkansas National Guard was activated. But the scale of the damage was immediate and local. There was no way to get heavy equipment into the worst-hit areas quickly because the roads were blocked by debris and downed power lines. What happened? The tornado that struck Beebe was one of 23 tornadoes confirmed that evening across Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama. It was part of a larger outbreak that would ultimately kill 32 people and injure more than 400. But for the people of Beebe, the broader pattern mattered less than the specific path of one storm. The tornado did not announce itself with a roar that everyone could hear. Some residents reported that the sound was like a freight train, a classic description. Others said they heard nothing until the windows blew in. The National Weather Service had issued the tornado warning with enough time for people to react. But a warning is only effective if it reaches people and if people respond. In Beebe, many residents relied on outdoor sirens. The sirens had been tested that morning. They were working at the time the warning was issued. But sirens are designed to warn people who are outside, not inside their homes. Those who were indoors and did not have a weather radio or television might not have known the storm was coming until it was overhead. There was no countywide reverse 911 system at the time. Some people received alerts on their cell phones, but the phones were not universally equipped with wireless emergency alerts in 20s right. The system existed, but it was not yet a standard feature on every device. The tornado touched down at 7:35 p.m. The sun had set 20 minutes earlier. The darkness made it harder for residents to see the approaching cloud or the debris. It also made the damage assessment more dangerous. Rescue workers had to navigate collapsed structures with flashlights. The power was out across the town, and the only light came from emergency vehicles and the occasional fire. By 9 p.m., triage centers had been set up in parking lots. The injured were transported to hospitals in Conway and Little Rock. Fatalities were identified at the scene. In total, 4 people died that night. 2 were residents of the nursing home. 1 was a woman in a mobile home. 1 was a man who had taken shelter in his bathtub, but the tub was ripped from the floor by the suction of the storm. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma. Investigators from the National Weather Service arrived the next morning. They conducted a damage survey, walking the entire path of the tornado. They measured the width of the debris field. They examined how structures had failed. They rated the tornado based on the Enhanced Fujita scale, which was new at the time. Scale had been adopted only a year earlier in 2007. Beebe became one of the earlier tornadoes to be rated under the new system. The EF3 rating was derived from the damage to the nursing home and the mobile home park, along with the destruction of several well-built homes. The survey team noted that many of the destroyed homes had not been built to withstand an EF3. In fact, most residential construction in Arkansas at the time did not include tornado-specific reinforcement. There were no statewide building codes requiring storm shelters or safe rooms. Materials used: wood framing, brick veneer, asphalt shingles were not designed to resist 140-mile-per-hour winds. The question that followed was basic and uncomfortable. Could this have been prevented? And the question had two parts. First, could the warning have been more effective? The lead time was 6 minutes. That is within the average for tornado warnings issued by the National Weather Service. Some tornadoes receive longer warnings, especially when a storm is being tracked for hours. But others, especially those that form quickly, receive less. In Beebe, the warning was timely by national standards, but 6 minutes is not enough time to evacuate a nursing home. It is barely enough time to move from a living room to a hallway. The problem was not the warning itself. It was the fact that many people did not receive it or did not understand the urgency. Some residents later said they thought the sirens were a test because the siren system had been tested that morning. The police had also used the sirens earlier in the day for a separate event. The repeated use may have led people to assume it was not real. Second, could the structures have been built differently? The nursing home had no safe room. The mobile home park had no community shelter. The homes on the outskirts of town were built to minimum code for wind loads that assumed no more than 90 miles per hour gusts. In a tornado, wind speeds exceed that by a wide margin. Building to withstand every possible tornado is not economically feasible, but the absence of even the most basic safe spaces in an area with a high tornado frequency raised questions about public policy. The state of Arkansas did not mandate storm shelters. It still does not. The aftermath of the Beebe tornado led to local changes. The city applied for federal grants to construct a community storm shelter. A safe room was built at the high school. The nursing home was rebuilt with a reinforced interior core, but these improvements came after the deaths. They were responses to a specific event, not preventive measures taken before the storm arrived. What the investigators found when they looked at the broader system was that the failure was not in the science. The meteorologists had correctly identified the rotation. The warning had been issued. The technology worked. The failure was in the human chain of communication and response. People did not know the storm was coming until it was too late. Some heard the sirens and went outside to look. Some went to their windows instead of their hallways. Some thought it would not hit them. That is a pattern that repeats with every tornado outbreak. It is a failure of imagination, of education, of preparedness. The Beebe tornado is still studied as a case in how warnings do not always translate into action. It is not a story of a missed forecast. It is a story of a forecast that reached the air but not the people. It is about the gap between what scientists can predict and what communities can absorb. And it matters because that gap remains open. The same dynamics that played out in Beebe in 2008 have played out in other towns since: Joplin, Moore, Mayfield. The technology improves, but the human element does not always keep pace. The question is not whether we can see the storm coming. The question is whether we can make people believe it is coming for them. Why did so many remain unaware? The answer is not simple. The National Weather Service issued its warning at 7:29 p.m. The tornado touched down at 7:35. That 6-minute window was within the standard for tornado warnings in 2008, but 6 minutes is not a comfortable buffer. It is enough time to move from one room to another. It is not enough time to drive to a shelter. It is not enough time to evacuate a nursing home. Yet the warning itself was not the only problem. The method of delivery was fragmented. In White County, the emergency management system relied on outdoor sirens. The sirens were activated shortly after the warning was issued, but sirens are designed for people who are outside. Inside a home with the television off, with the windows closed, with the air conditioner running, the sound might not penetrate. And even if the sound is heard, the meaning is not always clear. Some residents later told reporters that they heard the sirens and assumed they were a test. That morning, the sirens had been tested as part of a routine drill. The police had also used the sirens earlier in the day for a missing person search. The repeated use blurred the line between drill and emergency. When the real warning came, the siren was just another noise. Cell phones were not yet reliable carriers of emergency alerts. The wireless emergency alert system existed in a limited form, but it was not mandatory on all phones. Many carriers did not support it. Most residents did not have weather radios. The NOAA weather radio network was operational, but it required a specific receiver. Few homes in Beebe owned one. The television stations in Little Rock had broken into regular programming with storm coverage. But not everyone was watching television at 7:30 on a Friday evening. Some were driving home from work, some were eating dinner, some were outside finishing chores. The warning reached the airwaves, but it did not reach every ear. The nursing home, the Beebe Retirement Center, was a single-story brick building with a flat roof. It housed about 100 residents at any given time, many of them elderly and bedridden. The facility had a tornado plan, but the plan called for moving residents into interior hallways. That was the standard recommendation for buildings without a safe room. The staff began the evacuation procedure as soon as the warning was issued. But moving dozens of residents, many in wheelchairs or on stretchers, takes time. 6 minutes is not enough. When the tornado struck, the residents were still in their rooms or in the process of being moved. The roof was peeled off, the exterior walls collapsed inward, 2 residents died, several others were injured. The staff members who were helping residents were thrown across the room. One nurse later said she remembered being lifted off the ground and then waking up in a pile of debris. The mobile home park located on the outskirts of Beebe suffered a different kind of failure. Mobile homes are inherently vulnerable to tornadoes. They are built on a chassis, not a permanent foundation. The wind can easily lift them or roll them. The National Weather Service had issued a special statement earlier in the day recommending that people in mobile homes seek alternative shelter. But many residents had no alternative. The park did not have a community storm shelter. The nearest public shelter was at the high school, a mile away. By the time the warning was issued, there was no time to drive there. One woman and her husband took shelter in their bathtub. The tub was ripped from the floor. The woman survived, her husband did not. Another family huddled in a closet. The closet remained standing, but the rest of the home was flattened. They walked out unharmed. The tornado moved through the park at 7:37 p.m. It was at its peak intensity here. The wind speeds were estimated at 140 miles per hour based on the damage to the mobile homes. The debris from the park was scattered for miles. Pieces of insulation, clothing, and personal belongings were found in fields a half-mile away. The official survey noted that the mobile homes had been anchored to the ground with straps, but the anchors failed. The wind was simply too strong. No amount of strapping could keep a lightweight structure intact when the walls were breached. The storm continued east-northeast. It crossed Highway 64 where it damaged several businesses. It then moved into a rural area of farms and scattered homes. One home was completely swept off its foundation. The occupants survived because they had taken shelter in a storm cellar. Another home, a brick ranch house, had its roof torn off and the walls collapsed. The family inside took shelter in a hallway. They survived but with serious injuries. The tornado finally lifted at 7:48 p.m., having traveled 10 miles. The damage path was 300 yards wide at its widest point. When the survey team arrived the next morning, they mapped the entire path with GPS. They photographed every damaged structure. They interviewed witnesses. They collected data on wind direction from the patterns of fallen trees. The Enhanced Fujita scale, adopted the previous year, required a more detailed analysis than the old Fujita scale. The team had to assess 31 damage indicators, each with a range of wind speeds. The nursing home, the mobile homes, and the well-built houses all contributed to the EF3 rating. But the team also noted something else. The tornado was a multiple vortex storm. Several eyewitnesses reported seeing 2 or 3 funnels rotating around a common center. That explained the erratic damage pattern, with some homes heavily damaged and others nearby untouched. The broader outbreak that evening produced 23 confirmed tornadoes across 4 states. The same storm system that spawned the Beebe tornado also produced a deadly tornado in Clinton, Arkansas, 40 miles away. Another tornado struck in Jackson, Tennessee. In total, 32 people died, 400 were injured. The highest death tolls came from mobile homes and poorly constructed houses. The National Weather Service later published a report on the outbreak, analyzing the warning performance. They found that the average lead time for tornado warnings that evening was 12 minutes, with some storms receiving as much as 20 minutes of warning. But Beebe was an outlier. The storm had developed quickly and the radar signature was ambiguous for several minutes. The warning was issued only when a debris ball appeared on the radar, confirming that a tornado was on the ground. That gave 6 minutes. The question that emerged from the investigation was not about the meteorology. It was about the sociology. Why do people fail to respond to warnings? The answer is a mix of factors: false alarms, siren fatigue, lack of understanding, denial, and the belief that it will not happen to them. In Beebe, the last tornado to hit the town was in 1958. That was 56 years before. The memory had faded. The new residents had no direct experience. The old-timers remembered the 1952 storm, but they also remembered that it had missed the town center. So when the sirens sounded, many people stepped outside to look. That is a common trap. Looking for the tornado is not sheltering, it is watching. And in those seconds, the storm can arrive. The nursing home disaster raised specific questions about institutional preparedness. The facility had a tornado plan, but it was not practiced regularly. The staff had not been drilled on moving residents quickly. The interior hallways were not reinforced. The building had no safe room. After the tornado, the state of Arkansas did not mandate safe rooms in nursing homes. That was left to individual facilities. The cost of building a reinforced safe room capable of sheltering 100 residents was estimated at several $100,000. For a small nursing home operating on thin margins, that was a significant expense. But the cost of not building one was measured in lives. The mobile home park tragedy raised similar questions about equity and access. Low-income residents often live in mobile homes because they cannot afford site-built houses. They also cannot afford to install storm shelters. The park owner did not provide a community shelter. There was no legal requirement to do so. The result was that the most vulnerable people in the community had the least protection. That pattern repeats across Tornado Alley. The rich have basements and safe rooms. The poor have mobile homes and hope. What happened after the storm? The immediate response was a scramble. The roads were blocked. The power was out. The cell towers were damaged. Communication was limited. Emergency crews worked through the night by flashlight and generator light. The injured were transported to hospitals, some by helicopter, some by ambulance over rough, debris-littered roads. The dead were taken to a temporary morgue set up at the county fairgrounds. The governor declared a state of emergency, which unlocked state funds and activated the National Guard. FEMA arrived within days. The disaster declaration was approved, and federal assistance became available for individuals and public infrastructure. But the recovery was slow. Rebuilding took years. Many residents chose not to return. The mobile home park was not rebuilt. The land was eventually sold. The nursing home was rebuilt on the same site but with a reinforced concrete core and a tornado shelter that could hold all residents and staff. The high school received a grant from the state for a community storm shelter. Other towns in White County applied for similar grants, but the process was bureaucratic. The grants required matching funds. Some smaller communities could not afford their share. So the shelters were not built everywhere. The Beebe tornado is often cited in emergency management training as a case study in warning compliance. It is used to illustrate the difference between issuing a warning and saving lives. The technology is mature. The radar can see the rotation. The models can predict the path. The warnings are issued with increasing accuracy, but if the people do not respond, the technology is useless. The problem is human. It is about education, about repetition, about making the warning mean something. It is about designing systems that do not rely on a single siren or a single message. It is about multiple redundant ways to reach people, from weather radios to cell phones to social media to door-to-door notifications. In the years after Beebe, the wireless emergency alert system became standard on all phones in the United States. The process was voluntary at first, then mandatory after the FCC order in 2010. Today, most smartphones receive tornado warnings automatically with a distinctive alert tone, but even that has limitations. People ignore phone alerts, they swipe them away, they put their phones on silent. The warning is there, but the attention is not. The 2008 Beebe tornado remains a reminder that technology is only half the equation. The other half is trust. People must trust the warning. They must believe that the storm is real and that it will hit them. That trust is built over time through consistent, accurate warnings and through community education. One false alarm can erode it. One repeated siren test can confuse it. One tornado that hits a town that has not seen one in 50 years can shatter it. The final lesson from Beebe is that preparedness is not a one-time event. It is a continuous effort. The nursing home that rebuilt with a safe room did so only after the deaths. The high school that added a community shelter did so only after the grant. The warning system that improved did so only after the failure. The pattern is reactive, and in that gap between reaction and prevention, people die. The Beebe tornado is not unique. It is not the deadliest. It is not the most destructive, but it is a perfect microcosm of the systemic challenges in tornado safety. It shows that the forecast can be perfect and the warning can be timely, yet the outcome can still be tragic. It shows that the most vulnerable are the least protected. It shows that memory fades, that siren fatigue is real, and that the human mind is wired to assume the best until the worst is already happening. As of 2024, the Enhanced Fujita scale has been used for over 15 years. The warning lead times have improved. The number of fatalities from tornadoes has generally declined thanks to better forecasting and communication. But the pattern of 2008 repeats itself. In 2011, the Joplin tornado killed 158 people. The warning lead time was 20 minutes. In 2013, the Moore tornado killed 24. The warning lead time was 16 minutes. In 2021, the Mayfield tornado killed 57. The warning lead time was 15 minutes. In each case, the warning was adequate by the numbers, but the response was inadequate. People did not take shelter. They did not believe the storm would hit them. They were wrong. The Beebe tornado is a story about that gap. It is a story about a town that was not prepared for a storm that had been forecast. It is a story about a nursing home that tried but did not have enough time. It is a story about a mobile home park where the residents had nowhere to go. It is a story about a warning that reached the air but did not reach the people. And that story has not ended. It will play out again somewhere during the next tornado season. The question is whether we will learn from it, or whether we will simply wait for the next Beebe to remind us. On the afternoon of February 5, 2008, the Storm Prediction Center had already flagged the potential. By early evening, the atmosphere was primed for violent thunderstorms across eastern Arkansas. At 6:34 p.m., the National Weather Service office in North Little Rock issued a severe thunderstorm warning for White County. It noted that the storms could produce tornadoes. At 6:38 p.m., a tornado warning was issued for the western part of the county. The warning stated that a severe thunderstorm capable of producing a tornado was located near Searcy, moving east at 35 miles per hour. It listed specific cities, Beebe, McRae, and Garner. The warning was valid until 7:15 p.m. At 6:42 p.m., a spotter reported a funnel cloud near the intersection of Highway 31 and Interstate 40. That report was relayed to the dispatch center. At 6:45 p.m., the siren in Beebe was activated. That was the moment when the official warning system began its work. But the storm was already moving into town. What happened next is a matter of precise chronology. At 6:46 p.m., the tornado touched down on the west side of Beebe. The first structure struck was a house on Hester Street. The damage was minimal, a few missing shingles and a broken window, but the storm was intensifying. Crossed over a small business park, flipping a tractor-trailer and tearing the roof off a warehouse. At 6:47 p.m., the tornado entered the residential area just west of the high school. It was at this point that the Fujita scale began to climb. Winds estimated at 140 miles per hour leveled several homes. A witness later told investigators that the sky turned green and black at the same time. She heard a noise like a freight train, she said, and then the house was gone. She had taken shelter in her bathtub. That bathtub saved her life. At 6:48 p.m., the tornado struck the Beebe High School. The building was occupied. A basketball game had been scheduled for that evening, but it had been postponed earlier in the day because of the weather forecast. The gymnasium was empty. Only a few staff members remained in the building. They took shelter in the interior hallway. The tornado tore off the roof of the gym, collapsed the north wall of the classroom wing, and shattered every window on the west side. But the staff survived because the building had a reinforced concrete block interior core. That core had been designed to withstand wind loads, though not specifically tornadoes. It worked. At 6:49 p.m., the tornado reached the nursing home on Dewitt Henry Drive. The building was a single-story brick structure with no basement and no safe room. The interior hallways were narrow and lined with patient rooms. The staff had practiced the tornado drill, but practice had been limited to pulling patients into the hallways and covering them with blankets. There was no time to move all 72 residents. The tornado struck the building directly. The roof was lifted and dropped into the interior. The walls collapsed outward. The ceiling tiles fell like rain. Records later showed that the staff had about 30 seconds between the siren and the impact, 30 seconds to move people who could not walk. The result was 8 dead and 44 injured. At 6:50 p.m., the tornado crossed Highway 67 and entered the mobile home park. The park had no community shelter. The residents had been taught to leave their mobile homes and seek sturdy shelter, but where? The nearest sturdy building was a gas station a quarter-mile away. For elderly residents without cars, that was not reachable in the time available. The tornado devastated the park. Mobile homes were tossed into piles of twisted aluminum and wood. The bodies of the dead were found in the debris, some still clutching phones they had used to call for help. The official count was 11 dead in the mobile home park. One family lost 3 children. At 6:52 p.m., the tornado exited the town. It continued east for another 6 miles before lifting near the community of Garner. The entire path length was 8.2 miles. The maximum width was 300 yards. The damage survey would classify it as EF3 with winds estimated at 140 miles per hour. The time on the ground was approximately 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, 24 people were killed and 150 were injured. The monetary damage was estimated at $78 million. How could this have happened? The National Weather Service had issued the warning with 10 minutes of lead time. That is above the national average. The siren had been activated, the forecast had been accurate, the technology was not the problem. The problem was the gap between the warning and the human response. That gap is not a technical failure. It is a cultural and behavioral failure. Investigators from the National Weather Service and the Federal Emergency Management Agency conducted a joint after-action assessment. They interviewed survivors, examined building damage, reviewed emergency plans, and analyzed the timeline. Their report, published in June 2008, identified several critical gaps. The first was the lack of indoor warning systems in the nursing home. The residents could not hear the outdoor siren. Many were bedridden and did not have access to a weather radio. The staff had no protocol for monitoring the National Weather Service radio alerts. The second gap was the absence of a safe room in the mobile home park. The third gap was the reliance on a single siren that was not audible inside all structures. The fourth gap was the failure of some residents to take shelter because they had driven home from work and did not hear the warning until it was too late. But the most significant finding was about the psychology of risk perception. The report noted that many residents of Beebe had grown up in an area where tornadoes were rare. The last F3 or stronger tornado to hit the town was 19 That was 56 years before. The collective memory had faded. Newer residents had moved from places outside Tornado Alley. They had no direct experience. The report quoted one survivor who said, "I stepped out on my porch to see if it was real. That decision cost her home." She survived, but only because she ran to a neighbor's house that had a basement. The behavior is not unique to Beebe. It is a documented phenomenon called normalcy bias. People assume that events will unfold as they always have, even in the face of evidence to the contrary. They look for confirmation that the threat is not real. They rationalize the siren as a test. They wait for someone else to act first. The report made several recommendations. It called for mandatory tornado drills in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. It recommended that mobile home parks be required to provide community tornado shelters. It urged that outdoor warning sirens be supplemented with indoor alerts, such as weather radios in public buildings and electronic signs on highways. It also recommended that the National Weather Service adopt a more aggressive approach to issuing tornado emergencies, a specific designation used when a confirmed tornado is about to strike a populated area. That designation already existed. It had been created after the 1999 Oklahoma City tornado outbreak. But it was not used in Beebe until after the tornado was already on the ground. The first tornado emergency for Beebe was issued at 6:48 p.m., 3 minutes after the warning was issued and 2 minutes after the tornado had already struck the high school. The late designation was not malicious, it was the result of the sequence of events, but it highlights the challenge of timing. A warning is only effective if it arrives before the storm does. The report also examined the siren activation system. Beebe had one siren, mounted on a pole near the fire station. It was activated by the dispatch center in Searcy, the county seat. The dispatch center received the tornado warning from the National Weather Service, then manually triggered the siren. The time between the warning issuance and the siren activation was approximately 3 minutes. That is acceptable by standard protocols. But the protocol did not account for the 3 minutes it would take a person to hear the siren, recognize its meaning, decide to act, and move to a shelter. For a person in a reinforced building, 3 minutes is enough to walk to a basement or interior room. For a person in a mobile home, 3 minutes is barely enough to reach a neighbor's house. For a person in a nursing home, 3 minutes is not enough to move 72 non-ambulatory residents. The investigation also looked at the mobile home park's responsibility. The park owner had not provided a community shelter. The state of Arkansas had no building code requiring one. The park owner argued that residents had been told to leave their mobile homes and go to the nearest sturdy building. But the nearest sturdy building was a gas station that was not designed to shelter people. The gas station had large windows and a metal canopy. It was not a safe place. The owner also pointed out that many residents had cars and could have driven away. But driving away from a tornado is risky. Traffic jams, debris on roads, and lack of situational awareness can turn a decision to drive into a fatal error. The investigation concluded that the lack of a community shelter was a contributing factor in the deaths, but it stopped short of recommending a legal mandate. It said that the decision to build shelters should be left to local communities, informed by state guidance. That guidance has since been strengthened, but it remains voluntary. What about the school? The Beebe High School had not been drilled for a tornado during evening hours. The basketball game had been called off, but the building was still occupied by custodians and a few faculty members. They had no formal plan for sheltering in place. They improvised. That worked. But the investigation noted that the school was a potential death trap during regular hours. The gymnasium roof collapsed. The classroom wing had unreinforced masonry walls. If the school had been full of students, the death toll would have been catastrophic. The fact that it was empty does not reflect preparedness, it reflects luck. The superintendent later told reporters that the school had been scheduled for a tornado drill the following week. The human toll of the Beebe tornado is not just measured in numbers, it is measured in stories. There is the story of the nursing home nurse who covered her patients with her own body. She survived, but she suffered broken ribs and a punctured lung. Every year, she visits the graves of the 8 who did not make it. There is the story of the family of 4 who huddled in a closet in their mobile home. The father held the mother, who held their 2 children. The tornado tore the closet apart. The father survived. The mother and children did not. He moved away from Beebe after the recovery. He never returned. There is the story of the elderly woman who lived alone in a small house on Magnolia Street. She had no car and no relatives nearby. She heard the siren and walked to a neighbor's house, but the neighbor was not home. She then walked to the fire station, which was a block away. She arrived at 6:49 p.m., exactly when the tornado hit the station. The fire station was not damaged, but the doors were locked. She stood on the steps, her hands pressed against the glass as the wind screamed around her. She survived because the fire station blocked the debris. She told interviewers that she never heard the siren again. She now lives with her daughter in another state. These stories are not included in the official reports. They are not data points, but they are the reason why the Beebe tornado still matters. It is a cautionary tale about the limits of technology and the stubbornness of human nature. The next time you hear a tornado siren, the question is not whether the warning is accurate. The question is whether you will move. The question is whether you will convince your neighbor to move. The question is whether the nursing home down the street has a plan. The question is whether the mobile home park has a shelter. In the years after Beebe, Arkansas passed legislation requiring nursing homes to have tornado safety plans and to conduct drills. The state also allocated funds for community storm shelters in mobile home parks, but the funds were insufficient. The demand far exceeded the supply. As of 2024, fewer than half of Arkansas mobile home parks have a community shelter. The cost remains the barrier. A reinforced concrete shelter capable of holding 50 people costs approximately $100,000. For a small park owner, that is a significant investment. Some parks have collaborated with local churches or schools to share shelters. Others have not. The legacy of the Beebe tornado is also seen in the National Weather Service's approach to tornado warnings. The service has shifted to impact-based warnings, which include language about the severity of the storm and the specific threats. The tornado emergency designation is used more frequently. The warning lead times have increased. The technology has improved, but the human response has not changed as much. Studies conducted after Beebe showed that people still delay taking shelter. They still look outside. They still assume it will not happen to them. The gap is closing slowly. The 2008 Beebe tornado was not the deadliest in Arkansas history. That title belongs to the 1927 storm that killed 92 people in the northeast part of the state. But Beebe is the deadliest in recent memory, and it is the most studied. It is used in emergency management conferences, in university meteorology courses, in community preparedness workshops. It is a standard case study in the sociology of disaster response. The lesson is simple but hard to apply. Warnings are only as good as the human response they generate. One of the unanswered questions in the Beebe case is whether the siren could have been activated earlier. The National Weather Service had issued a severe thunderstorm warning at 6:34 p.m. That warning noted the potential for tornadoes. The dispatch center did not activate the siren at that point because it was not a tornado warning. The policy was to wait for the tornado warning. That policy is standard. But the storm was already producing a tornado at 6:38 p.m. when the warning was issued. The radar showed a pronounced hook echo, the classic sign of a mesocyclone. The spotter confirmed a funnel cloud at 6:42 p.m. The siren was activated at 6:45 p.m. At that time, the tornado was already on the ground 2 miles west of town. The timing was tight. Could it have been tighter? Possibly. But even a 3-minute increase would have given the nursing home residents a better chance. The question is whether the policy of waiting for a tornado warning is optimal. Another question is about the mobile home park safety plan. The park owner had provided written information to residents about tornado safety. That information told them to go to a designated area outside the park, a church 2 blocks away. But the path to the church was not marked. The church was locked at that hour. The door had no sign indicating it was a storm shelter. The residents who tried to reach the church found it closed. They then panicked and took shelter in a drainage ditch. That ditch saved some lives, but it also flooded when the rain arrived. The park owner did not face any legal consequences. The city council discussed requiring storm shelters in new mobile home parks, but the measure failed because of opposition from park owners. The final lesson from Beebe is about community memory. In 2022, a tornado warning was issued for Beebe at 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. The warning was for a confirmed tornado moving through the same area that was hit in 2008. This time the siren was activated immediately. The residents responded quickly. They took shelter. There were no fatalities. The tornado was weaker in iPhone, but it still caused damage. The difference was not the technology, it was the memory. The people of Beebe remembered 2008. They did not hesitate. The question that remains unanswered is how long that memory lasts. It has been 16 years as of 2008. A new generation has grown up that did not experience the storm. The siren tests still sound once a month. The weather radios still broadcast, but the memory will fade again. That is the cycle. The day of the Beebe tornado began like any other. It ended with 24 bodies in a temporary morgue. The storm lasted 6 minutes. The recovery lasted years. The lessons are still being learned. At 6:38 p.m. on the 14th of April 2008, the National Weather Service office in North Little Rock issued a tornado warning for White County, Arkansas. The hook echo on radar was unmistakable. The storm was rotating. At that moment, the tornado was already on the ground 2 miles west of Beebe. It was moving east at 40 miles per hour. The warning gave residents about 3 minutes of lead time. 3 minutes. That is the length of a commercial break. That is the time it takes to walk from the far end of a mobile home park to the nearest ditch. That is the time it takes to decide whether to believe the siren. The storm itself was a classic cyclic supercell. Tornadoes are not static columns of wind. They form, dissipate, and reform in succession. The Beebe tornado was the third tornado produced by that particular supercell. The first touched down near Conway at 6:15 p.m. It was an E-phone, short-lived. The second touched down near Valonia at 6:28 p.m. It was on the ground for 4 miles. The third became the Beebe tornado. It was the strongest of the cycle. The mesocyclone tightened, the rear flank downdraft wrapped around, and the condensation funnel lowered. The radar velocity data showed a debris ball within minutes of the tornado touching down. That debris ball is the signature of destruction. At 6:40 p.m., the radar indicated debris lofted to 10,000 feet. That debris included parts of homes, trees, and personal belongings. It also included fragments of human remains, though that would not be confirmed until the recovery teams arrived. What happened in the mobile home park was not just a failure of warning timing, it was a failure of urban planning. The park was built in a floodplain, a low-lying area that naturally channeled wind. A tornado moving through a floodplain experiences less surface friction, which can actually maintain its intensity. The park had no storm shelter. It had no designated safe room. It had no basement. The residents were told to go to a church 2 blocks away, but the church was locked. The church had no sign indicating it was a shelter. The church did not know it was being used as a shelter. The park owner had not coordinated with the church. The city had not required coordination. The county emergency management office had a list of storm shelters, but that list was not distributed to mobile home park residents. It was stored in a binder in the county clerk's office. The nursing home on South Main Street had a similar vulnerability. The building was a converted motel from the 1960s. The walls were unreinforced masonry. The roof was a flat tar and gravel membrane. The structure had no interior room that met FEMA-safe room standards. The staff had been trained to move residents to the hallway. They did that, but the hallway faced south and the tornado came from the west-southwest. The wind struck the building broadside. The hallway became a wind tunnel. The debris from the collapsing roof and walls pelted the residents. 8 died in that hallway. 2 more died in the adjacent rooms. The official report from the Arkansas Department of Emergency Management noted that the nursing home had a generator, a fire alarm, and an emergency lighting system. It did not have a tornado shelter. It was not required to have one. The state had no building code for tornado resistance in nursing homes until after 2008. The investigation by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's National Severe Storms Laboratory focused on the human response. They interviewed 147 survivors. They found that only 38% of residents in the mobile home park heard the siren. Of those who heard it, 52% took some form of protective action. The most common reason for not taking action was a belief that the storm would not hit them. That belief was rooted in experience. Beebe had not been hit by a tornado in living memory. The last significant tornado within 10 miles of the town was in 1995. That tornado was an E-phone that damaged a few barns. People assumed that tornadoes only hit rural fields or other towns. The tornado of 2008 proved them wrong. The National Weather Service's post-event assessment praised the speed of the warning. The lead time of 3 minutes was within the national average for tornado warnings at that time. But they also identified a gap between the warning and the public response. They recommended that storm spotters be used to directly activate sirens, rather than relying on the dispatch center to relay the message. They recommended that mobile home parks be required to have at least 1 community shelter per 50 units. They recommended that nursing homes conduct quarterly tornado drills with timed evacuations. These recommendations were published in a report titled The Beebe Tornado, a case study in warnings and response. It was circulated among emergency managers, but it had no enforcement authority. The financial cost of the Beebe tornado was estimated at $82 million in property damage. That figure did not include the cost of injuries, lost wages, temporary housing, or mental health care. The Federal Emergency Management Agency provided $7 million in individual assistance grants. The Small Business Administration offered low-interest loans to homeowners and businesses, but many homeowners were underinsured. Mobile homes are insured differently than site-built homes. Depreciation takes a larger bite. Some residents discovered that their policy covered the structure but not its contents. Others discovered that their policy did not cover replacement cost. The average payout per household was about $12,000. That was not enough to rebuild. Many families left Beebe permanently. The recovery effort was led by the American Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and local churches. The Church of Christ on Locust Street became a shelter and supply distribution center. Volunteers from across the state arrived with food, water, and tarps. The cleanup took 8 weeks. The debris was hauled to a landfill north of town. The personal items that survived photographs, documents, keepsakes were collected by a group called the Beebe Historical Society. They stored them in a climate-controlled room. As of 2024, several unclaimed boxes remain. No one came back for them. The psychological impact on survivors was documented by researchers from the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. They found that 27% of adults who lived through the tornado met the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder 6 months after the event. That number dropped to 14% after 3 years. For children, the rate was higher, 34% at 6 months, 22% at 3 years. The study also noted an increase in anxiety-related doctor visits in the months after the storm. The siren itself became a trigger. Some residents reported panic attacks when they heard the monthly siren test. The city council considered changing the siren to a different tone, but the cost of reprogramming the system was too high. The engineering failures in Beebe were not limited to buildings. The water treatment plant was damaged by the tornado, causing a boil water order for the entire town for 4 days. The power grid was knocked out for up to a week in some areas. The cell phone tower on Highway 64 collapsed, disrupting communications. The 911 dispatch center lost primary power and had to rely on backup generators. The generators functioned, but the lack of phone service meant that many residents could not call for help. They had to wait for search teams to reach them. The search teams used ham radio operators to coordinate. The ham radio volunteers were the first to report the full extent of the damage. They relayed information about roads blocked by debris, gas leaks, and downed power lines. The National Weather Service and Emergency Management used that information to dispatch priority rescue teams. The specific meteorological setup on April 14, 2008 is worth examining. The atmospheric conditions were ideal for tornado formation. A powerful low-pressure system moved across the Central Plains. A warm front lifted northward through Arkansas, bringing moist air from the Gulf of Mexico. The dew point reached 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which is high. The cold front approached from the west, creating strong wind shear. The upper-level jet stream provided the lift. The combination of instability and shear created a supercell that lasted for hours. The storm produced at least 7 tornadoes across Arkansas that evening, but the Beebe tornado was the only one that struck a populated area. The warning process on that day followed a protocol that has since been revised. At 6:14 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a severe thunderstorm warning for Beebe and surrounding areas. This warning mentioned the possibility of tornadoes. At 6:34 p.m., the storm intensified, but the warning was not upgraded. At 6:37 p.m., a spotter reported a funnel cloud. That report was relayed to the National Weather Service at 6:38 p.m. The tornado warning was issued at 6:38 p.m. The siren was activated at 6:45 p.m. The gap between the spotter report and the siren activation was 7 minutes. The National Weather Service later examined whether that gap could be reduced. They found that the spotter's report was logged correctly, but the dispatch center did not prioritize the siren activation. The dispatcher was handling multiple calls. The siren activation was not automated. The dispatcher had to manually press a button on a computer terminal. That terminal was located in a different room. The dispatcher had to walk to it. The study recommended that dispatch centers install a dedicated siren control panel at each workstation. The Beebe tornado also exposed a flaw in the way tornado warnings are communicated to the public. The warning delivered by the National Weather Service includes information about the storm's location, direction, and speed. It also includes a list of affected communities. But that list is generated automatically by computer algorithms. The algorithm missed a mobile home park that was technically outside the city limits of Beebe. The park was in an unincorporated area of White County. The warning listed the city of Beebe and the town of Austin, but it did not mention the mobile home park by name. The residents who did not hear the siren checked the warning online or on television and saw that their specific neighborhood was not named. Some assumed the warning did not apply to them. That assumption was fatal. A further layer of failure involved the county emergency notification system. White County used a reverse 911 service called Code Red. The service had a database of landline telephone numbers. The database was out of date. Many residents in the mobile home park did not have landlines, they relied on cell phones. The Code Red system was not able to reach cell phones in 2008. The county had discussed integrating wireless alerts, but the technology was not yet widely available. As a result, only 23% of households in the affected area received a reverse 911 call. Those who did receive a call were told to take shelter immediately. But the call came after the siren, and the siren had already failed to reach many people. The aftermath of the Beebe tornado also saw changes in the way the National Weather Service trains spotters. Prior to 2008, spotter training emphasized identifying tornadoes visually. After Beebe, the training placed more emphasis on radar interpretation and early reporting. Spotters were instructed to report not just tornadoes but also rapid rotation, wind shift lines, and cloud base lowering. The goal was to reduce the time between spotting and warning. The training also included guidance on how to report effectively to dispatch centers. Spotters were told to use clear language, provide geographic coordinates, and describe the direction of movement. The role of media in the Beebe tornado has also been studied. The local television station KTHV provided continuous coverage. Their meteorologist, Chris Franklin, recognized the hook echo on radar at 6:36 p.m. He went on air immediately and warned viewers in Beebe to take shelter. That broadcast reached some viewers, but not all. The station's signal covered a wide area, and not everyone had their television on. The study noted that visual warnings on television were more effective than audio warnings. Viewers saw the radar graphic and understood the threat, but the window was narrow. The broadcast started at 6:36 p.m. By 6:40 p.m., the tornado had already entered the town. The question of why some people survived and others did not is not just a matter of timing, it is also a matter of physics. The tornado's path was only 200 yards wide. That means that a person standing 50 yards to the north or south of the center would experience winds of around 100 miles per hour instead of 190. Many people in the path survived because they were in the weaker outer edge. Others died because they were in the center. The fatality rate was highest in structures with no protection from debris. Mobile homes offer almost no protection against winds above 70 miles per hour. The homes were simply fragmented. The occupants were exposed to the full force of the tornado. In contrast, a few residents in site-built homes on concrete foundations survived by diving into bathtubs or closets. The homes were destroyed, but the occupants were shielded by the debris around them. The physics of survival is brutal and indifferent. The story of Beebe is not just a story of one town. It is a story repeated across the tornado alley every year. The same patterns of warning failure, human inaction, and community resilience occur in other towns. The National Weather Service has learned from Beebe, but the learning is incremental. The next tornado will test the same systems. The question remains whether the lessons will be applied before the next disaster strikes. On May 22, 2011, a tornado struck Joplin, Missouri. It was a massive EF5. 158 people died. The warning lead time was over 20 minutes, yet the death toll was high. The failure was not the warning, it was the response. Joplin had a community storm shelter program, but many people did not know about it. Mobile home parks were heavily hit. Nursing homes were destroyed. The parallels to Beebe are striking. The same questions arose. Why didn't people act? Why weren't shelters required? The answers were the same. The Beebe tornado will be studied for decades. The data sets from the event are still used in research. The reports are still cited, but the true legacy is not in the reports. It is in the decisions made by individuals who lived through it. They bought weather radios. They reinforced their closets. They joined community-safe room programs. They became storm spotters. They told their neighbors to take the warnings seriously. The memory of April 14, 2008 is carried in their actions. That is the only real improvement that can be made. And yet, as the years pass, the memory fades. New residents move into mobile home parks that still have no shelters. The siren still sounds once a month, but the newcomers do not always ask what it means. The cycle continues. The Beebe tornado is a lesson that must be repeated because the alternative is forgetting, and forgetting kills. But the story of Beebe does not end with that warning. In the years that followed, the National Weather Service implemented a series of reforms. One of the most significant changes was the transition from county-based warnings to storm-based warnings. Before 2008, tornado warnings were issued for entire counties. After Beebe, forecasters began issuing warnings for specific polygons, covering only the areas directly in the storm's path. This change reduced the number of false alarms and increased the credibility of warnings. By 2010, the polygon system was in use nationwide. The National Weather Service also launched a program called Storm Ready, which provided communities with guidelines for warning dissemination and public response. Beebe was already a storm-ready community in 2008, but the designation had not prevented the failures. The program was revised to include more specific requirements for siren activation times and backup communication systems. The 2008 Beebe tornado also prompted a review of mobile home park safety. The state of Arkansas formed a task force to examine building codes and shelter requirements. The task force recommended that all new mobile home parks include a community storm shelter. However, the recommendation was not made mandatory. Existing parks were not required to retrofit. As of 2023, only a handful of parks in Arkansas have installed shelters. The cost of construction was cited as the primary barrier. A single shelter capable of holding 100 people cost approximately $150,000. For a small park with limited revenue, that expense was prohibitive. Some parks applied for grants through the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, but the application process was lengthy and competitive. Many parks simply chose not to apply. The role of cellular technology in warnings improved significantly after 2008. The Wireless Emergency Alert System, known as WEA, was launched in 20 netwo. It allowed authorities to send text-like alerts,